At the edge of a wide coastal wetland, just before sunrise, groups of birds begin to lift in loose, uneven waves. They do not rise all at once. Small clusters leave first, circling briefly, then aligning into a shared direction that stretches far beyond the visible shoreline. Others follow, not by copying a single leader, but by adjusting their position relative to those already in motion. Within minutes, what began as scattered movement settles into a narrow, consistent path, cutting across the sky. This path is not random. It repeats across days, across seasons, and across years. Even as individuals change, the direction stabilizes into a corridor. The movement appears coordinated at a distance, but up close, it emerges from many small adjustments each bird, responding to air conditions, terrain, and the position of others nearby. The persistence of these routes can be traced to constraints that become visible only when movement extends over long distances. Migration is not a single decision, but a sequence of decisions, each influenced by energy limits, atmospheric conditions, and the availability of places to stop. A straight line between two distant regions is rarely viable. Instead, the path bends, narrows, or shifts to remain compatible with what the environment allows at each stage. Air movement is one of the most immediate constraints. Wind patterns are not uniform across space. Over open water, winds tend to be more stable, but offer fewer opportunities for rest. Over land, wind can be disrupted by terrain, but rising air currents can reduce the energy required for sustained flight. Birds moving long distances tend to position themselves where these conditions align with forward movement. Over time, routes that consistently provide supportive wind or lift become reinforced, while less efficient alternatives are gradually abandoned. This does not require a global awareness of the route. Each segment of the journey is shaped locally. A bird encountering a headwind may shift slightly to one side where resistance decreases. Another may adjust altitude to enter a layer of air moving more favorably. These adjustments accumulate. When repeated across many individuals and many migrations, they produce a stable directional pattern that appears as a fixed corridor. Geography introduces another layer of constraint. Large bodies of water, mountain ranges, and desert regions impose limits that cannot be ignored. Crossing open ocean reduces access to rest and increases exposure to weather shifts. Mountain ranges may create turbulent air on one side and rising currents on the other. Deserts reduce the availability of food and water, narrowing the margin for error. As a result, migration routes tend to follow edges, coastlines, river valleys, and lowland corridors where the balance between movement and resource access remains viable. These edges do more than guide direction. They compress movement into narrower bands. When multiple viable paths exist, the ones that maintain consistent access to resources, while minimizing energy expenditure, become more frequently used. Over time, repeated use concentrates movement along these paths. What begins as a range of possible directions becomes a more defined route, not through coordination, but through the gradual filtering of less viable options. Energy management reinforces this process. Migration requires sustained effort over long periods. The ability to refuel at intermediate locations becomes critical. Wetlands, estuaries, and other resource-rich areas function as temporary nodes, where birds can restore energy before continuing. Routes that reliably connect these points become more stable. If a path leads to a gap where resources are scarce, individuals following that route are less likely to complete the journey successfully. Over multiple cycles, such paths diminish in use. This creates a chain-like structure. Movement is not simply between origin and destination, but between a sequence of viable segments. Each segment must support the next. If one segment becomes unreliable due to changes in weather patterns or resource availability, the overall route may shift. However, the shift is constrained by the surrounding environment. Alternative paths must still satisfy the same conditions, which often limits how much the route can change. Social interaction adds another layer, but it does not override these constraints. Birds moving in groups can benefit from shared information about local conditions. Slight directional changes by a few individuals can influence nearby birds, creating a ripple effect. However, these adjustments are still grounded in immediate environmental feedback. A direction that increases resistance or leads away from known resource areas is less likely to persist, regardless of how many individuals briefly follow it. Over time, this interaction between individual adjustment and environmental filtering produces recognizable flyways. These are not fixed in the sense of being rigidly followed by every individual, but they are stable in the sense that they consistently emerge under similar conditions. The flyway represents a balance point, a route where energy use, risk, and resource access align closely enough to support repeated long-distance movement. Risk management is embedded in this structure. Long migrations expose birds to unpredictable weather, predation, and exhaustion. Routes that reduce exposure to these risks, even slightly, gain an advantage. For example, staying within reach of land can provide emergency landing options. Following terrain features can offer visual orientation cues, reducing the likelihood of disorientation. These factors do not eliminate risk, but they distribute it in a way that makes the journey more manageable. The result is not a single optimal path but a constrained set of viable paths. Within this set, variation still occurs. Weather shifts can push birds slightly off course. Resource availability can fluctuate, causing temporary changes in stopover use. However, the overall structure remains, because the underlying constraints remain. As long as the distribution of wind patterns, terrain, and resources stays relatively consistent, the flyway persists. Importantly, this persistence does not depend on memory. At the level of the entire route, local cues, wind direction, landscape features, the presence of other birds provide enough information for individuals to make decisions that align with the broader pattern. Even inexperienced individuals can contribute to maintaining the route by responding to the same constraints that shaped it. Seen from the ground, the movement may appear coordinated, as if guided by a shared plan, but the coordination is a byproduct of constraint. Each bird is solving the same set of problems under similar conditions. The similarity of these solutions produces alignment. Returning to the wetland at the start of the observation, the pattern becomes clearer. The birds that lifted first did not define the route. They entered a set of conditions that favored a particular direction. Those that followed adjusted to the same conditions, reinforcing the alignment. As the groups merged and extended outward, the path stabilized not because it was imposed, but because it was the most viable way to continue moving. Hours later, the sky is empty again. The route is no longer visible, but it has not disappeared. It exists as a tendency, ready to re-emerge when the same constraints and decisions converge.